I'm very excited to welcome you all to our Artist-to-Artist Conversation, which is something we do every third Thursday, the third Thursday of the month. We invite two artists to just ask each other 3 questions and learn a little bit more about each other. And I'm really excited for tonight because we have 2 people who are both really looking to organize people in order to affect social change through cultural organizing, through food, through art. So I'm going to hand it over to the 2 of you to begin speaking to each other, but welcome to both of you and to everyone else.
Thank you for being here, everybody. I'm really excited to talk to you. We already talked a little bit, we cheated.
And then we're like, stop, don't
tell me anymore. I'm currently working on a book project, and so it's around a topic that I never thought I would want to spend any time thinking about, which is my adolescence. And so I have been asking every creative person that I know, but especially just creative folks, what in your adolescence has impacted the work that you do today as an adult?
So a part of what makes, that shapes this answer is the fact that I am the only girl child of my generation on both sides of my family. I have nothing but brothers and male cousins. So what does that mean? It means I spend a lot of time alone. I spend a lot of time talking to myself. I spend a lot of time reading and thinking, and so part of one of the greatest gifts that fell into my lap was when a friend of mine sent me Bell Hooks' theory as a liberatory practice, and I realized that there is like inherent value in thinking about theory and ideas. And it also, because I spent so much time alone, as an adult, I don't like to work alone. I always work in collectives. I like to work in bodies. I want to shout out Complex Movements, Il Weaver, Carlos Garcia, Wajid, Wes Taylor. They're out opening work in other places in the country. And so I think that is the way my adolescence has shaped me. It has given me a space of ideas and time and value to think about different things. And it has taught me how much farther I can go when I'm in community with people.
A lot of what you're saying resonates, and I just never thought I wanted to consider my adolescence. I thought I wanted to just close it away because I was so depressed and I was so alone. But what I've realized also is that's when I started to become a creative person, or realize my creative power and potential, and externalizing those things kind of gave me this reason to to think, I can connect to the greater world around me and other people around me. And so it really was this turning point. So as much as I kind of think, awful, I'm in retrospect starting to realize, wow, it was like the starting point of so many things, so many art. I think for me at that point, as a child, I think it had been about wonder and imagination, and it really, as an adolescent, became about survival and also feeling.
So I recently joined the podcast world. I host a podcast called Tactile Transforming Art and Culture. And one of the questions that opens up every podcast, whoever I'm talking to, is how do you believe change happens? And I'm curious, given the work that you do in the world, what undergirds that? How do you believe change happens?
I think that change happens in connection. And I think it happens in our ability to recognize that it happens in connection. As a teacher, also as an educator, and as a family member, I'm always thinking about this question of how do we get each other to care enough about people different from ourselves? Because to be quite honest, I got parts of my family that would be perfectly happy to live their life at the mall. And I got some ancestors that probably wouldn't have a problem with that because they would be safe, well-fed, and in a temperature-controlled environment. And after generations of trauma, what is that wish for future generations? And so that would be my question also to you, in terms of your work, is how do we get folks to care about one another, and what are the tools that you use and strategies that you use in your work?
The goal of the work that I make is to uplift and support local organizing. So we're always, if we're in a city, working with cohorts of folks who for so many reasons may live in the same city but never have an opportunity to work together, but through a particular artistic expression, a production, an installation, have an opportunity to have this focal point to come together and strategize together. So we think a lot about both this idea of like conjuncture, which is like the soup, and then also leaning into those difficult spaces is where we find real connection. You know, like if I'm always like, hey, I love you, how you doing? Oh my God, you look so good. That's a relationship. But if we've had to struggle together, if we've had to figure out something together, oh, that's a relationship. Figuring out how to make work that makes visible the places that we wrestle with each other and then gives people space to wrestle in respect and to wrestle with principle and to wrestle with love gets us further in how I feel like we build connection with each other. So I walked through the exhibit a little earlier. The tagline is transform media to end racism and poverty. And I would love to hear you talk about how your work might resonate with this idea of like ending racism and poverty, or like what are the ways in which you lean into that idea?
Media has really been a way for us, to communicate beyond the 500 bodies that we're able to serve. Marnie de Guzman, actually, who we had worked with on the Streets Project, said something really smart to us, and she said, Sita, if you woke up the day after the meal and you read the newspaper and you saw a headline about this meal, what would you want it to say? And it was such a smart question, and it really helped for me clarify, yes, it is about racial justice, it is about equity. It is not actually, like food is an excuse, it is necessary for human survival. It becomes a matter of equity when there is not enough of it or you're not eating enough of it in a day, right? But really it is, it's, I think, a vehicle for us and for me. And it's just one of the toolkit, like I love that tool. I have a lot of tools, and that's one of the ones I love. Food is one of the tools that I love. And so I try to tell them, my students also, it's like, I don't care if you write books or if you cook or if you make signs, but how can that serve a greater common good?
So one of the other things that shows up in the exhibit is this idea of strategies for change. So we've kind of talked about like we're doing what we do because of what we believe it is going to lead. What is its impact? But how do we get there?
Okay. Our strategy for change at People's Kitchen Collective is that we have a therapist. Melvin Escobar, he's wonderful. We prioritize it. And even at times when we have not had a lot of funds in the bank, it has been a quarterly check-in facilitated by him is one of the foundations of the work that we do. And actually, we just did a check-in with a larger group of leads, PKC, People's Kitchen Collective leads, that we're working on a project together. It's something that we felt was really important to do when things are both difficult and when things are going well, because it means that you're not kind of going back just when there's just in the problem kind of sticking points that you were talking so beautifully about, because that's really like where the work happens in those times where you're like, I may not ever want to see this person again, but we will tomorrow morning, and I love you, and so, but I think, I say that because it's made such an impact and it's also, I think, helped us prioritize how we are in relationship to each other over the product of the work that we make or like the meal that we make, and that is also something that I talk about in my classroom too. That like I don't prioritize like your group meal together that you're assigned to do, but I do prioritize the way that you treat each other in the process. Because to be honest, a semester isn't long enough, in terms of doing deep work to do many things that, that my students maybe want to do, like address homelessness in the Bay Area. There are definitely ways to connect into that work, but it is much bigger and much deeper. Well, actually, I was going to take a question that you were, I think, going to ask me, which is about this, why work collaboratively or why work collectively?
The phrase that comes up for me is like, it's not what you do, but how you do it. And like the transformation and change happens in the how you do it. And so that's one that's really hard to do by yourself, like one hand clapping. So it's important for there to be others that can hit your hands so that There's a sound. There we go, there's a sound. When we are in relationship, when we're in collaboration, we have a greater ability to be what, well, I'm going to say I call, but there's a whole book about it, anti-fragile, right? And so it's iterative, where I'm learning something, you're learning something, we're both learning something at the same time. It's still being filtered through us, so it's different for each of us. And then we come together and what we create is different. And then the next moment, we're each filtering it, and then the next thing is different. And so it allows us to not just bounce back from challenges or resist tyranny and oppression, but again, that's where we find our spaces to dream and find new things and new visions. And so for me, collaboration and working with other folks is a dreaming practice. It's a visioning practice. It helps me get past the limitations of my own life and my own interpretation of the world and join it with someone else's, and collectively we create something new. So there's a quote on the wall, not in this wall, on the wall. I'm pointing to the exhibition that says, "There is no such thing. No one is voiceless. It's just people whose voices haven't been heard." What does voice look like in your work for you, and also for folks that you work with?
You know, it's not that people are voiceless; it's that we're not listening. And I think the beautiful potential that we have as artists and creative people, and as media producers, is to create a frame or even a lens sometimes to just help us focus in on one part of that so we can understand and connect to it. Because, you know, it can be overwhelming. It can be like this galaxy, right? But it's, I mean, what I often say is that it's my job as an artist is that the stars exist. I'm just trying to draw lines between them and make a constellation, you know?
Okay, well that is us. And our time, there's no following that. Let's take constellations.
Let's make constellations.
It's been great talking to you.
Yeah, thank you. Here we go. Okay.